All right, and I'm gonna share my screen. We're gonna hope that this works. I have two monitors. We'll see. All right. Does that look like it's in presentation mode? Okay,
Great.
successful. Okay, great. All right, then let's get started. So to make sure that you're all at the right place, it is the business plan basics and why you need one. Okay, so a brief introduction. I'm Lindsay Wolf, for those of you who do not know me. I'm currently the Executive Director of Alternatives Impact, and I'll get into what Alternatives Impact does at the end, as well as Cloud is going to discuss a little bit about another grant program. Mine is a loan program, so we'll get into that after the questions. I used to work at the SBDC as a business advisor as of 3 weeks ago. So for those not familiar with the SBDC, they offer free business counseling. So whether you're an existing or a startup business, it's free business advice. They'll help you with your business plan. They won't write your business plan. I'll mention a couple times when they might be a really good resource throughout this. For my experience, I've assisted over 100 folks with loans and grants totaling over 15 million. That was through SBDC. And then advised over 400 startup and existing businesses. So I've seen a variety of different industries. So what we're going to talk about today is just general. There may be stuff that's specific just to you, which is why it's helpful to talk to a business advisor. And we can also talk about the different types of advisors in the local area too that are open for you. All right, so what is a business plan? A business plan is sometimes a scary sounding document that folks need. It doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be long. It's just outlining what is your business model and making sure that you're thinking through every aspect of your business and making sure that it's viable. So it's just laying that out. It doesn't have to be long. It doesn't have to be very well written in terms of, multiple paragraphs. It can be just a stream of consciousness to start. So I would not be too afraid of it, although I can't tell you how many clients come in and they feel very overwhelmed. So I'm going to do my best to break it down into sections for you. So why do you need one? There's a couple of reasons. One would be to obtain funding. So if you need a grant or a loan, you're always going to need to have a business plan. Occasionally, lenders will ask you for a business model canvas instead. In this area, it's rare. We're seeing that more in like New York City or in California. A business model canvas is just a one-page document. I highly recommend that you look up that as well. Sometimes if you don't want to write your full business plan yet, and you just want to kind of do a brief overview of your business and get some ideas, and maybe you're just thinking through some changes in your existing business, or you have a startup and you want to think through, what's my value? Who are my customers? You could just do a one-page business model canvas. However, in the local area, there's still very much an emphasis on a business plan. So you'll need that for funding. You also need it to set benchmarks. So some folks want to go through and lay out maybe a 2 to 5 year plan. COVID has changed that. It's very hard to do long-term planning with COVID. So I always say, try to check back regularly with any plan you make to see if you're on target and to see if it's still in alignment with where you were thinking you were going to be. And then it can help you with decisions as well. If you have an opportunity that presents itself and you want to look back at your business plan and make sure that your vision, your mission, your staffing would maybe align with that big decision that's coming up, I always recommend checking in with it as well. There's deeper work that you can do throughout your business plan too, to figure out what is your why and what do you need out of your business. And you can also put that in the business plan. I'll get into a little bit about how a business plan would differ for a bank versus for yourself. It also helps to reduce risk because you're going to go through some risk scenarios when you do your business plan. And it's stuff that folks don't always think about. And so you want to be able to look at things the best you can from a level of looking at the economy, the political situation, cybersecurity, all sorts of things that could impact your business. As we saw with COVID-19, no one really saw a pandemic coming. So now I always add pandemic risk into the risk analysis in case anything, a global event happens again. How would you respond? And no one's going to have an answer that fits every single risk scenario, but you can help reduce the risk if you have contingency plans. You can also check your viability of the business and any big potential mistakes. Maybe throughout the process, you discover wow, I'm open 80 hours a week. There's no way I can have enough funding to fund that. So then you scale back. I've seen folks who had to take a hard look at their hours, their staffing. They realized that maybe that market that they were going for wasn't the best and they had to pivot their idea. So once you get it out on paper, you can kind of flesh out, is this really viable? Am I missing something? Maybe I don't have enough cash to last me 6 months and I thought I did. So it helps you check yourself and then communicate with stakeholders. So let's say you just want to self-finance your business. You don't need a bank loan. Sometimes landlords will say, I want to see your business plan before they'll sign a lease. So there's also friends and family, if they're loaning you any money, there's potential investors, and they might want to see some sort of business plan. And then who is the audience? This is super important. So when folks would come to me at the SBDC and they would say, I need a business plan, I'd say, what is the goal of the business plan? Is it to get funding? Is it for yourself? Who is it for? Because how you write it and what attachments you do are going to be different. If it's just for yourself, it doesn't have to be as formal. It doesn't have to be as polished. You can just kind of think through your ideas. If it's for a lender or a bank, you should really have a business advisor proofread it ahead of time or work with you, because there's certain things that underwriting are going to want to see in your plan. And it can really help have that extra set of eyes look at it. So I put a very long list here. I'm going to go through them. What I did throughout the presentation is I made my slides a little bit more text heavy than I normally would, because we're going to give you the PDF handout of this as well, so that when you're writing the plan, you can go through it and see some of the tips. So you never want your main body to be more than 5 to 10 pages. So you'll have your cover page, you'll have a table of contents. Your appendix can be very long, all of your attachments, but when you look at the actual text of the business plan, it should not be long. I've seen some folks come in with 30 to 50 page templates that they found on Google. Like, just get rid of them. They're too long. A lender is not going to want to read all of that. And longer does not mean better. I have some folks that, like, throughout it, they just keep repeating the same thing. And again, attention spans are short, especially, for lenders that have a whole stack of business plans coming in that they have to look at. You want yours to be very concise. You can include relevant photos throughout. I have some folks who have really beautifully photographed food, or maybe it's a business model that a lender's not quite familiar with. You can include some photos of it so they understand. I wouldn't go photo heavy. I'd make sure that it's still formatted nicely, but you can break up some of the text that way. You want to be really specific and back up your claims with data and cite your sources. So I'll get into this later too. Your data that you can obtain can get pulled from the SBDC. They have a research network. I always recommend folks reach out to them to get the data that they need to write the business plan or to do the financial projections. I see people come in and they say, well, my market is everyone and we're the best at this. And there's like a lot of generalizations, and lenders will see through that. They really want it to be specific. So you have to be really specific and back up your claims. And you don't want to be unnecessarily wordy, really clear, to the point. If you find yourself repeating yourself a couple times, see if maybe you can take those sentences out. White space is your friend, so a lot of spacing. If they see giant blocks of text that have maybe like 7 sentences in a row, it can be very overwhelming for them, and they might skip over that entire section and not read it. So I would certainly try to break it up. Use bullet points as often as you can, and try not to, like I said, try not to repeat yourself, which I'm repeating myself. So there you go. And then the goal is to make it through underwriting. Underwriting is the process where you go to the lender, you've worked with your loan officer, and then they send it to a third party to evaluate your plan and your financials. And you want to make it through underwriting with a minimal number of questions, which is why I always recommend going to a business advisor. Or if you have a good relationship with your loan officer, saying, hey, can you read through this and see what might be a red flag to the underwriting team? Because oftentimes your loan officer can tell you. Each bank and credit union or grantor is going to be different on how they read it, what they expect out of it. Some are more flexible than others. So it's always a good idea to talk to the loan officer and talk to a business advisor. The plans can take weeks or months to write. I have some folks that come up and they're like, I need my plan next week. And that's really tough, especially if it's a startup, because there's a lot of revisions that have to happen with a plan, especially if you're doing the marketing and industry sections. You want to revisit your plan annually if you can to see what's changed. What are the increased risks maybe associated with it? Did we handle things well? So always go back to it. Just look at it like a living document. It's not the be all end all. It's also a way, if you're a startup, to test your model and to come back in a year and say, oh, how'd we do? What does it look like? Can we make any changes? And then you want to write like it's going to a middle school classroom. My niece just graduated from middle school, and I always think, would she understand this? Because you have to think that not everyone is an expert in the field that you're an expert in. And so, typically with middle school, you're getting folks who haven't had their first jobs yet. They haven't really been exposed to a lot of industry. So if they can understand what it is that you do and what you're selling, I always look at that as a good starting point. All right, so I'm going to go through the assumption that folks might just need a bank loan, or maybe they're going for a grant. So you would need your business plan. You would need your pro forma, so your financial projections, and I'll get more into that later. You'll need personal financial statements, which are going to look at what are your personal assets, your personal liabilities, what's your credit card debt, your student loans, do you own a house, do you have a car, what's your car payment? Some folks think that their personal stuff won't impact business, but it does. They always look at personal in addition to the business. They'll need your permission to pull a credit report, and then they'll need an application completed. So that's pretty much the process that would look when you're going into the bank. So your basic business plan outline, and again, some of it applies, some of it doesn't, but in general, everyone's going to be filling out these sections, and I'll go into them in more detail. So you'll have that executive summary. You're going to describe your business. The legal entity is super important. Your management and personnel, location, products and services, pricing, market information, competitive analysis, marketing plan, financial analysis, and risk assessment. And again, you'll get this handout and I think video. So the executive summary is the very first thing that a bank is going to see, or a lender, your stakeholder. You have to write it last. You want this to be the wow paragraph, 1 to 2 short paragraphs. It has to grab their interest. They're going to want to keep reading it, but you don't want to dump all the information and then in the next section, which will be the description of the business, repeat everything you just had in the executive summary. It can feel really boring for them. You have to put in the beginning, how much are you requesting and how much equity do you have to invest? They're going to want to know right off the bat how much money you're going to need. You don't want them skipping around for information. Oftentimes, folks won't even read your business plan in the order that it's written. They're going to skip around. Some folks want to go immediately to your marketing section. Other folks will want to go immediately to your financial section. So if you can at least cover the financial piece in the beginning, it's a good starting point. So I just put an example of like fake companies, the area's premier fake business, the owner brings like X amount of years of experience. You could maybe add another sentence or two, but I would leave it at that. I would not do any more than that. And then you could say like, what are your year one sales? What's your debt ratio? That's something that an advisor can help you with too. If you're not quite sure with the debt ratio, you just take your debt and the income coming in. And then you can talk about your growth rate for the first year. And then you want to get into that request. So how much are you requesting? Sometimes people are going to be requesting multiple different types of loans. So a real estate loan from one bank, maybe they're going to get gap financing from an economic developer, an economic development company in the area. So that'll be listed separately. And then they're always going to want to know how much money are you personally investing into the business? Almost every place that you go to will want to see owner equity into it. The program through Alternatives Impact is a rare exception. We don't require anything, but the vast majority of programs will. So make sure you put how much you're going to put in. And then you want to get into the description of your business. So it needs to be short, again, no generalizations. No, this is the best thing that's ever existed. We're the only one who does it, because chances are other folks do. And if it is true and no other folks do it, you still want to be a little bit more specific. And then what is the business? You can introduce a little bit about what your goods and services are, but you don't want to get too detailed yet because there will be a separate section where you can get a little bit more detailed. The unique value is really important. You'll often hear it called your value proposition or your unique value. So what sets you apart? Maybe it's your pricing, maybe it's low pricing. Maybe you're solving a specific need in the community that hasn't been solved before. You'll want to talk about what makes you unique here. You'll want to list your industry so they're aware of what that is. If it's a startup, I have some folks who have to come back and do a really quick business plan because they want to expand. Maybe they need some more equipment. Maybe they want to bring in a new product line. So if you're an existing business, oftentimes you can get away with a much shorter business plan, especially if you've already worked with a lender before. Sometimes they just might want like a 1 to 2 page summary of your idea. And then if you're purchasing an existing business, put how long it's been in business, any details that you can give, maybe why the sellers are selling the business. And then you want to avoid any industry jargon or acronyms. If you do have any of that, make sure you're explaining it, because again, you don't know who the end user is of your business plan and what type of experience or knowledge they have in your industry. So you need to take that time to educate them on your industry. The legal formation and professional support section, there are 2 separate sections in the business plan, but I'm combining them here. The legal formation is really important. When you put down your entity that you're going to establish or that you already have, make sure that you're as truthful as possible. We just ran into a scenario where someone didn't put that down and they put that they were like sole owner. And that can lead to fraud if you go through a bank and that goes through the whole process. So just be really clear on the ownership. And you'll also want to put the percentage. So let's say someone owns 25%, another person owns 50%, and then there's a third person. You'll want to put, are there any minorities, women, or veterans that own the business? This can be important because sometimes there can be specialized funding for those categories. If there's licenses or permits required, I would put those. And if you haven't quite established your legal entity, but you will upon approval of the loan, you could also put that there. And then your professional support team, they're going to want to know that you have an attorney on standby. Alternatives Credit Union has free to low cost attorneys, even if you're not a member. I used to always recommend folks go there when I was with the SBDC. The accountant, you'll need an insurance company, a banker. If you have a business advisor, put them down, and then any other consultants. I have some folks who hire marketing consultants or SEO consultants, and we always recommend putting them in your plan so that a lender knows that you're thinking about all aspects of the business and that you're calling on a professional support team if you run into any situations that you need help. All right, and then your management and personnel sections. You need to be putting your own role. So even if you're the CEO or the director, make sure you put your title and list like 3 to 5 bullet points of your key job responsibilities. That's going to be important. They want to know what it is you're doing in the business. If there's any other management, like you need an operations manager, anything like that, make sure you put them in with their background too. Most of the time you can attach a resume in the appendix. Lenders often want to see that you have experience in the field, and whether or not you run your own business or not, it doesn't matter as long as it just shows that you have some sort of experience doing the job responsibilities that you need to have. If you are going to have employees, there will be another section for personnel. Typically, you would list how many you need because oftentimes folks are asking for money because they want to add more staff. If you do have personnel, you can list how many you need, what training and support and incentives are you providing them. And what we've seen recently about the past year or so is folks are wanting to also see how are you going to find employees. I've had a couple loan committees come back and say, it's a pretty difficult climate right now. Are you sure you're going to be able to hire these employees by the date that you say? What are your incentive packages? What are you going to be paying them? Is it a livable wage? So you have to think through those things when you're doing your plan. And then the location information. A lot of people will gloss over this section, and I invite you to do as much work in this section as you can, because the loan officer or the grantor has never been in your space, likely, if it's a physical space. So you want the address, you want to describe the area. Is it on a residential street? Is it on a main street? What type of traffic does it have? There's traffic counters that you can look at too. So maybe you could list how many cars drive by a day. Is it near an interstate? What's the parking like? Handicap access. If you are doing any sort of manufacturing, is it near any airports or railroad hubs? How are you going to get those goods and services in? Does it have a loading dock? If the interior of the building matters for your business model to be viable, then you need to explain, what does a customer feel when they enter into it? If it's a restaurant, how many tables are there? What's the occupancy rate like? If it's an online business or an e-commerce business, what's the online experience? Is it easy access to a shopping cart? What are the product descriptions like? And then you can also list your hours of operation and make sure that if they change seasonally, that you're mentioning that. I found a couple of red flags with clients before going through their business plans where they put their hours of operation, but they were inside of a mall and the mall closed, and they put that they were open past the mall being open. And that's a big red flag too for bankers, because they'd say, wait a minute, how are you going to get people in here? And what's going to happen with mall security? And can you even be in there? Are people even allowed to walk by your shop if the mall is closed? So you can catch some potential mistakes going through this exercise. And you also want to make sure that with your hours of operation, if you have staff, are the staff able to cover all of the operations in accordance with the labor laws that are needed? Did I go too far? I did. Okay. All right, the products and services section, you want to be brief here when you describe it. Sometimes I see folks list all of their products here. That can be better in the appendix if you think it's needed for them to see. Because again, sometimes if people get a business plan and they look and they're like, oh no, it's 30 pages, sometimes they'll just not read it. So I always recommend putting things in the appendix if you can. But you still want to give a general idea of what are you offering. If there's several different lines, make sure you're describing what they are. And then for your product-based businesses, is there an inventory management system that you're going to use? How are you going to make sure that you're reordering them with enough time? And again, especially in the unprecedented times with COVID and the supply chain being what it is, there's a lot of my old clients who are having trouble getting their supplies in time, and the lead time was much larger. And so banks are really taking a closer look at how are you going to navigate the supply chain issues, and what's going to happen to your customer relationships if these are out of stock? How are you going to navigate that? And then some folks will need security systems to protect their inventory. It doesn't apply to everybody, but if it applies to you, make sure that you speak about how you're going to protect that inventory. And then what POS system will you be using? Folks are going to want to see that you have some way of tracking what's coming in and out, especially when it comes to having your bookkeeping properly done as well, as it relates to your inventory. And then the market section is by far one of the most important sections that folks are going to read. They really want to know that you've done the work, understanding your market, your industry, and how you're going to reach them. So this is pretty long, and I'll just kind of skim it. And again, you'll have the presentation. You really have to go through a customer discovery process. Who's going to be buying the products or services? They might have some unique features. There's a debate right now amongst lenders, professionals, advisors on, do you need to drill down into their ages and income range specifically and create an avatar? Some folks say yes, they like to see that. Others say it's not necessary. I would invite you to at least think about, what are the age ranges? What are the salaries? Some folks will come and say, well, my market is everyone, and that's just not true. Not everybody can afford the product or service. Not everybody would necessarily want that. So just get a little bit more specific. Is there a demand for the product or service? And how do you know? Have you done surveys? Have you looked at the market? Have you looked at competitors in the area and have seen it lacking? And then what is the problem that you're solving? What pain point do you want to alleviate, and what gain do you want to create? Customers make their purchasing decisions based on emotions. And so how can you tap into that, and how can you best solve that problem for them? And also, where are they? Is it bound by geographic boundaries? Or do you want to go online and hit anyone in the United States? Do you want to go internationally? What is the plan? How big is the market that you want to capture? And then how are you going to let them know who you are and where you are? Especially if you say that you're going to go online and reach them anywhere, that can be tricky. You're going to have to do targeted advertisement. You're going to have to do a lot of work on the back end with keyword trend searches and things like that. So you want to make sure that folks know that you've thought through how you're going to find these customers and also how you know what their needs are. The industry data can be super helpful, especially when doing revenue projections. A lot of times folks say, well, I don't know where to start if it's a startup, because they say, I feel like I'm making up my numbers. And, in some ways you are, but you can also be basing your assumptions on the data that you can find in reports. So the SBDC has access to these reports. And right now, some of the major colleges and universities do as well. So if you know anyone or you work at one, I would go and pull what's called an IBIS World report in your industry. They're so helpful. They give you financial benchmarks. They talk about industry growth. They talk about challenges to the industry. In the business plan template that you'll be getting after this, it's going to have a couple other names too. There's one called Vertical IQ. So it'll list them all out on potential reports that you could pull. You can also yourself pull some census data too, so you can get a sense of, who's in the community, what's the demographics like. And then you'll want to speak to what are the trends? Is it growing? Are there any threats to the industry? Is it stable? After COVID, a lot of the industry reports were redone last year. So if you have any reports on hand that are outdated pre-COVID, I would certainly talk to the SBDC or go to like a college friend who might have access to these reports from their library, and I'd pull current reports because every market has changed post-COVID. And then what's happening at the regional level versus the national level. So sometimes there might be industry trends that are only local, maybe by state or even like within your own county, and you're not seeing it on a national level or vice versa. And then some of the best practices in the industry will be in these reports, and you can list them in your business plan because you want to make sure that you're doing those best practices. And then your competitive analysis is super critical for bank loans. They're going to most of the time skip right to here and see if you filled it out. Sometimes I get folks who say, well, my competitors are terrible and I'm just so much better. You have to be more specific because they're doing something well, or else they wouldn't be in business at all. They might not be doing it super well, but there's something going on there. They might have some sort of strength. So you need to be aware of that and list what they're doing well, but also what's the opportunity for you? What could you be doing better? How do you set yourself apart? And how could you potentially capture some of the same market that they have? It may be helpful too, depending on what your business is to list how close they are to you. So again, if you have a retail store, maybe there's someone that's 2 doors down from you or a half a mile away. Or you could say, I do have competitors, but you'd have to drive 30 miles to get to them. So they're not a super big threat to my business, but I would still make sure that you're mentioning that. They want to make sure that you've done your due diligence and you've really looked at it. And, let's say if you're a donut shop and you say, well, I'm the only donut only place in the area. Well, not really. I mean, you can go to Wegmans and get a donut. Is it the same quality? Absolutely not. So your unique value is a high quality, locally sourced made donut, but you still need to acknowledge that there's donuts at Wegmans. And then is your business impacted by any indirect competition? So again, it won't apply to everybody, but just think through, especially in the day of the internet, can they go online and find this anywhere else? And again, what's that unique value? Maybe your market wants things that are made locally and sourced locally. And so you really lean into that in your marketing. And then finally, your marketing plan. You can go far out with this. Sometimes people will just do in general. Sometimes people will talk about the first year, what they plan on doing. But you want to know how you're going to advertise. You're going to want to be specific. Sometimes I get business plans back that say, I'm going to have a website and I'm going to be on social media, but it's not really diving in specifically because your customer isn't on every single digital channel. Are you going to be on TikTok? Are you going to be on Instagram? Maybe your business is only selling to other businesses and you don't really have to lean on social media as much. It's not for every business. Not every business has to have an Instagram. And the end user of your business plan wants to know that you understand your customers enough that you know where they're going to consume their content and where they need to be reached. Sometimes folks will say, I'm going to advertise in the newspaper and on the radio and on social media, and you can't be every place at one time, especially as a small business. Unless you have a group that's doing marketing for you, it's really difficult. So we say, you know, pick a couple that you could be really good at and consistent with, and then see what's working and not working. Marketing is all about trial and error. There's going to be things that just fall flat. So in this section, you also want to talk about how are you going to evaluate how your marketing is doing and then pivot accordingly. There's something called sunk cost theory, where maybe you've dumped so much money into doing a specific type of advertising that you feel like you have to keep going with it. But it's like, just, you've already spent the money, let it go. You know, if it's not working, let's just pivot and find a different method that's working. But in the plan, they're just going to want to know, you know, how much are you going to spend? How do you monitor those efforts? Are they working? Are you going to be looking at your analytics? You know, the Google My Business profile is really key. Some folks just do the bare minimum and register, but there's so much more you can do. Google offers free training for it. You know, in terms of website and SEO, that's important to talk about too, depending on what your business is. There's a lot of website platforms out there. They're not all great. You know, if you want to grow online, let's say, and you want to come up in search engines, then you need WordPress or Squarespace. You don't want to be on Wix. There's some other sites like GoDaddy. You don't want to be on that site, but you have to know specifically what do you need. And then the final piece is strategic partnerships. And people don't always touch on this as much in their business plan, but you can do strategic partnerships with other businesses. Maybe, you know, you're partnering with hotels to offer a discount to your service. You know, is there tourism in the area? Are there any partners that you can partner with? If your business has seasonality and you're really slow in the winter, are there any strategic partners that you can have that can help offset that in the winter time? So thinking through who you might be able to work with. And then your financial analysis. In the business plan itself, it's just going to be a brief summary. A chart or a graph would be lovely to have here. You don't want to do the bulk of your financials until you get into the appendix, because oftentimes there's bigger, more extensive tables where you've worked through your financials, and it can just be a lot to put in the business plan. It can be a little overwhelming. So I like to just include a brief summary and then point people to the appendix for more detail. You do want to include a sources and uses chart, because the bank or the grantor is going to want to see this immediately. So on the sources side, what are all the different types of sources where your money is coming from? You'll notice I put a real estate loan and an equipment loan separate. It's because oftentimes those will be two separate loans because they have separate terms. Like, for example, a real estate loan could maybe be 20 years at a set interest rate with a set down payment. An equipment loan's probably 7 years with a different interest rate. And you want to break those out, because when you're doing your projections, you're going to want to see how the principal payment changes over time. Your line of credit, and then equity. I always recommend that businesses ask for a line of credit, because you never want to rely on your credit cards. If you are maybe need to make payroll, or you need to buy supplies and the money hasn't quite come in yet, I would dip into a line of credit rather than a credit card. So always ask for a small line of credit, but try not to use it. And then equity. So that's the amount that you yourself are investing into the business. And that would include any down payments that you're doing. You know, typically when you're going for a bank loan, they're going to want to see 10 to 30% for equipment, and anywhere between 5 and 30% for real estate, depending on what type of loan you're getting. And then on the other side, it's your uses. So how much is the property? How much is the equipment? What specific equipment is it? If it's a lot of equipment, put a detailed assumption in the appendix so they can see exactly what you're buying. Sometimes they'll want to break down. I've done breakdowns for some clients of like all the furniture they're buying, a whole list in the appendix. What are your one-time startup costs that you just need once? Maybe it's signage, maybe it's the legal fees to set up your LLC. The rest of it is working capital. So that's just the cash to pay your expenses, to pay yourself, to pay your light bill. That would be in working capital. And you'll notice that both columns equal each other. You want to make sure that they always equal each other, that your sources and your uses are equal. Okay, and then your pro forma. Again, this is going to be attached. This could be a whole nother lunch and learn, because this is the whole thing. Typically, you have to have monthly cash flow projections. And depending on your end user, it's either going to be 1 year or 3 years. They'll probably always want to see 2-year projections of a profit and loss, but they don't necessarily need to see it broken down by month. Oftentimes, it's hard to determine what your monthly sales will be like in year 2 and 3. The 1 year broken down by month is really just to show, are there any ups and downs or seasonality to your business? The balance sheet will need to be done because it's going to show what your debts are. And again, if you're reading this and you're like, I don't know what any of these terms are, and this is super overwhelming, there are free advisors out there who do know and can like speak that language for you and can help you put this together. You don't have to do it alone. They're going to want to see what your debt ratio is, and then a very detailed explanation of your revenue assumptions. Very logical, very detailed, and based in any data that you might have collected. And again, this goes back to not waiting to the last minute. I've had to help some folks get packets together at the last minute, and we haven't been able to do as detailed into the assumptions as need be. And it causes issues because then the bank will come back, or someone will come back and say, how did you really get this? And, can you really do it? So the longer you can give, the better. If you, for example, want to ask the SBDC for industry data, that's a 2 to 3 week lead time. So just kind of manage your expectations with that. Okay, we've got 2 sections left. The pricing strategy. So they're going to want to know what your profit margins are. How much did you mark up your products? If you make them, did you actually calculate your cost down to the detail? I used to own a skincare business. I had a spreadsheet where every single thing that I had was priced down to the gram. And then I would take my recipe and figure out to the penny how much it was. And then I would do my markup. So I always recommend as much detail as you possibly can, because you want to make sure that you're profitable, and you want to make sure that your pricing, your markups, and your margins are in line with industry standard. And again, there's data that can tell you what that is. And there's folks who do this as a living who can tell you what it is. You don't have to find it on your own. And then how are you going to monitor that pricing and overhead over time? We've seen right now with COVID and the supply chain that prices and inflation, prices are increasing dramatically. So if you don't have a tight handle on it, you might end up in the negative of your cash every month. So they're going to want to know that you have a plan. And then if you have a very long price list, and some folks want to include it, I say, just put it in the appendix. I shove a lot of things off to the appendix. And risk analysis, sometimes folks will include this in their plan and sometimes they won't, but I recommend that whether you do or not, to go through it. It's a really helpful exercise. You want to know what your potential weaknesses and threats would be and how you would address them. Cybersecurity is a big one now, and there are free resources to help you with that too, if you want to think through that. Some people will do a SWOT analysis, which is your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. I find that to be hard for startups sometimes because they don't fully have those yet. So I like a pestle analysis. So you're looking, and again, this is detailed too in your business plan. You want to look at the politics. Is there any legislation locally, nationally that might come down and impact your business? Maybe there's changes to tax laws. Maybe there's changes to labor laws. The economy, recessions, supply chain issues, inflation, interest rates, any of that can impact your business. Socially, are the cultural trends changing? Even socially, vegan and vegetarianism is coming up more. That's an entry to market, or maybe that threatens you. Maybe you're a meat business and you don't have as many customers. So you want to look at how is the culture changing? And that's also why you want to do this analysis every year if you can, because you're going to keep seeing these changes. You're going to see that different generations have different purchasing trends, and you want to be aware of what those are. Technology, is there changes in automation that might help your business or might hurt your business? Legal, again, any sort of laws that might come down, labor laws. We see some changes in legislation as it relates to Family Medical Leave Act. So you have to think about that when you have employees. And then the environment. We've seen folks that have been negatively impacted by floods, crop loss, especially if you're a restaurant and someone has a crop loss out in the Midwest, that's going to impact your pricing. Maybe you can't get a certain ingredient if you have a signature dish. We can even throw the pandemic into environment. If there's massive disease spread again and you have to shut down, what's a contingency plan? And then COVID-19 is ongoing. Folks want to know, do you have enough staff to cover if they have to quarantine? How do you keep yourself safe? How do you keep your customers safe? And that leads us to my favorite appendix, which if anyone's ever seen the business packets that I put together, it's intense. There's a lot in there. If you're buying something, there's going to need to be a purchase agreement. You might need a copy of your lease. You might need copies of your resume, menu, product list, services, any support for the assumptions that you made. One time I was dealing with a birth center and I just put an entire journal article about birth centers in there because I felt like whoever was on the loan committee was probably not aware of what midwifery and birth changes were. Any legal formation documents, again, if you don't cite that you have a partner, that is fraud. And so we really want to make sure that that legal formation document's in there because you don't want to be committing fraud. There's a whole host of other stuff too. In the business plan template, there will be a whole long list. And again, not everything matters to you. You can always reach out to a loan officer or whoever is doing the grant and say, realistically, what do you want to see? And then they can let you know. Okay, I think we have time for questions. That was a lot of information that I just threw at you. You have the slides, you can contact me. In terms of help with your business plan, certainly the SBDC is always a good resource. AFCU, Impact a little bit. We have some TA, not so much, but that's primarily in the local area and all those services are free.
I just want to say that was so much information, and I partially read business plans for a living, and you really broke it down excellently. But I guess one of the questions that I have is for anybody who's newer to this or anybody who just feels intimidated, like I do a little bit. What's the best way to reach out to the SBDC or to reach out to Alternatives?
Yeah, so Alternatives has a schedule appointment link on there. I don't have the direct URL right now. So whenever I need it, I Google Alternatives Federal Credit Union, schedule an appointment, and it always comes up. So you can schedule one of their advisors. And then SBDC, the SBDC that serves Tompkins is based out of Binghamton. I used to be in the Tompkins area. We are hiring for my replacement. So if anyone knows anyone that would love to be a business advisor, or if you yourself would, they are hiring. So you can just Google the Binghamton SBDC and then they'll have a button on there to sign up for services.
Awesome,
and then
thank you.
If you're confused and you're like, I don't even know, you can call me. We can talk about it. It's fine. And then I would say too, you want to start small and don't feel too overwhelmed. I used to tell my clients, just take it section by section and just kind of word vomit into it. It doesn't have to be pretty. It doesn't have to be polished. Like that will come. But I would certainly reach out to an advisor. Gladys at Block, I believe, also reviews business plans as well. So there's a bunch of people in the area.
Does anybody else have any questions about anything that we covered today?
If there are none, I can also talk about RISE.
I don't have a question, but that was a great presentation. I used to own my own business and did a lot of work on my business plan, and I guess I wish I had reached out to you guys when I was in that position. But yeah, it's complicated. There's a lot of stuff that goes into it, and there are folks there to help. So I appreciate you reaching out and doing this for all of us.
Absolutely. Happy to help. Yeah, I think I could talk about this for hours, days. So I did make an education course, which is for RISE, which I can talk about. And it does have when you just want to work through your whole business model, and it'll kind of help you get that ready. There is that course. The SBDC has a free thing too. It can be a little hit or miss. Some folks love it, some folks hate it. And then I think Cloud, when you talk about micro enterprise, there's that other class too. So, I'd always reach out to whatever you can, either an advisor or a course, because it is so nuanced in every industry, and business is very specific too.
Yeah.
So for RISE, this is a pilot program that started last year. So it's still in its infancy and changing. So I always tell people bear with us. So I just took over. Alternatives Impact is a nonprofit, and it's not the credit union. It was at once kind of attached to the credit union. I describe it as sister organizations. So I just came on as the director. There's no real website yet. I have to build that. So you can go to alternativesimpact.teachable.com and that'll have some information if you know anyone that might be interested in RISE or you yourself are interested. So this program is character-based lending. What we just talked about for our bank, they're going to want to look at your credit score. They're going to want to see, do you own a house? Do you own a car? What's your cash savings like? How much down payment do you have? Ours is not like that. We just want to know, what's your business model? You know, are you coachable? Are you invested? And then we don't look at the rest, and we don't require any equity. It's mainly for folks who don't qualify for traditional lending. And it's our way of trying to just go rogue in the system a little bit. So it's for underserved and BIPOC communities, low income, rural, BIPOC women, those types of businesses. The educational piece was 12 weeks. We're kind of in the midst of changing the education, but it is about 15 hours worth of online content. And then it's no cost post-loan monthly mentoring after you get the loan, $5,000 to $20,000 loans for 5 years. And then the loan committee is unique in the sense that it's all just community members. So again, if you're interested in joining the RISE loan committee, we are also looking for folks. And it's not anyone with the traditional banking background. So maybe they've owned their own businesses or something like that, and they're reviewing them from that aspect, because traditional lending can sometimes be really difficult and can be excluding folks. So we're trying to come at it differently. So that's my spiel. And then I believe, Cloud, you're going to talk about microenterprise.
Yeah, so another really great thing about the RISE loan program is that it's one of a few things that helps to make you eligible for the Chamber's Microenterprise Assistance Program. So the program is a grant specifically designed for businesses with 5 or fewer employees, including owners, and grants range between $5,000 and $35,000. The process for preparing materials for the grant is a little bit more intense than other grant programs you may have come across in the past. But one of those requirements is taking an educational entrepreneurial training course, either RISE or through the Chamber in partnership with TC3. We offer a similar educational course that is an 8-week remote program. So if you have any questions about that program, please feel free to reach out to me. Again, my name is Cloud. I'm the Business and Workforce Development Specialist at the Chamber. We also have information about it on our website.
And I will say, if anyone's ever interested, it's really hard to find grants. I used to get a lot of folks that were like, I want to start a business, but I don't want a loan, I just want a grant. And I'm like, good luck. It is really hard. So, if you are interested, I would certainly take advantage of the microenterprise program. So we don't know when funds will ever come again for grants sometimes. So you want to get out to them as soon as you can.
Absolutely. Thanks, Lindsay.
Yeah. And then the city might have some funds coming at some point too. So I always recommend that people stay on their radar and get on mailing lists if you can, because oftentimes when grants come out, because they're rare, people snatch them up. So try to get on, the Chamber's mailing list, which clearly everyone is probably because you saw this. See if the city has any announcements that they can make too.
Okay, if nobody has any other questions, I'm going to go ahead and stop recording.